The Strangers, Prey at Night is the sequel to the first film that came out in 2008 starring Liv Tyler, and this film is once again about three masked killers who seem to be killing for no reason at all. This time they've targeted a family that's in a deserted trailer park, mom, dad, and brother and sister. And over the course of 85 minutes, we watch all four of them flee from these killers and try to escape from their monotonous attempts at death. This film was not good. The first Strangers, I think, is a pretty enjoyable slasher movie. It's not great, but there was something unhinged about that movie that was unnerving. And I liked the direction. Brian Bertino, I believe, was his name. He chose to do a lot of Steadicam and handheld stuff with that movie, and so a lot of shots felt just like there was more work behind it than your average slasher. So when we get to the sequel that's coming out 10 years later, this is directed by the guy who brought us 47 Meters Down. So that, this is yet another Carpenter-esque horror film. This feels like a movie that John Carpenter may have made in the 80s, except without the style and without any of the flair for real scares. It has everything that Carpenter liked. A victim running through a deserted neighborhood in the middle of the night while a killer stalks them very slowly while somehow also catching up. And a lot of sequences like that over and over again. And this movie doesn't have anything new to bring to the table. It's also not really a sequel that connects itself to the first in any way except for the fact that we have three masked killers that look the same. There's no attempt to bridge the gap. It feels like one of those direct-to-DVD sequels like Open Water 3 or Wrong Turn 6 that has no real connection to the first film. It's just a property now. So let's try to make it again. Also following in John Carpenter's footsteps is the 80s Synth Score. It sounds so much like John Carpenter's work on The Fog. I mean, I couldn't help but hear it. It sounded just like his piano theme for that film, and that was something that bugged me too. And following in the steps of Tobe Hooper, the director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's a shot towards the third act and a sequence that is so similar to that film that I saw it with my buddy the Flickpick, and we actually turned to each other and just said out loud, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We were whispering, but it was just so obvious, and I don't really understand what the point is here. Are they making an homage? Because if it's trying to be an homage or a tribute, it just comes off like a ripoff. When it comes to horror films like this, where the characters are trapped in one location, there are certain devices that could end the movie. A phone, a gun, access to a working vehicle, things like that. Without those things, you're trapped, and with those things, the movie's over. Throughout the film, characters get access to all three of these things, and you know for a fact nothing's going to happen. And the characters are so incredibly stupid that whenever they get a hold of one of these items, they find a way to get rid of it really fast. And one of my biggest issues with this film directly relates to that, and that's the villains. In the first movie, they were just these crazy people that tried to kill Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman. In this movie, they kind of come off like supervillains. It's one of the big problems with the worst James Bond movies. James Bond's not a superhero. He's just a guy with some skills. He's not a superhero. The worst Bond films treat him like he is. Same with Jason Bourne. Jason Bourne is not a superhero. He's just somebody who's very skilled. The second you elevate him to superhero level, those films are no longer as interesting or as grounded. That's a major problem with Prey at Night. The bad guys survive things that would kill any person. They somehow know whenever the hero gets a gun or a phone or a working vehicle, it's like they have 10,000 security cameras at this deserted trailer park and know every single move, and the second one of the characters gets a device that could end the film, they know exactly where to go. And as I said, they survive so many things that it's just so hilarious at some point. The film does get unexpectedly funny. There's a van scene. Many audience members were laughing during this van scene. Somebody gets injured and they drag it on. And you could tell that the filmmakers thought, wow, this is such a scary moment, but it was so poorly acted and so poorly conceived as a horror scene that it was just funny. That's another thing. The four main characters, they didn't seem to know which ones were the most interesting because the ones they chose to focus the most on were perhaps the least interesting characters. And because of that, the film just got kind of boring after a while and very monotonous. There's only so many times you can watch somebody almost die, almost get a hold of a gun, a phone, or a car, and then lose that, and then run away while screaming and crying. And a succession of scenes like that over and over again, it gets boring. I wasn't expecting anything amazing out of this film. I'm a huge fan of horror movies, and I love a good slasher movie, and I will watch cheesy slashers. I own tons of them. But this film had some atmospheric shots, and it had a few effective scenes. There's a scene in a pool. Really good stuff. That was probably the best scene in the movie. But there's so many dumb choices these characters make, and somehow they inexplicably keep losing access to things that could save their lives because they just don't give a shit about their own lives, I guess. But in reality, we know that it's really the people behind the film who are trying to figure out how they can get this thing to 90 minutes at least. And to do that, they have to keep these characters in this tiny deserted trailer park where nobody apparently lives except for these three psychopaths from the first Strangers, who I guess now, in the present day, 10 years later, are just hanging out in some deserted trailer park doing nothing. What's the connection to the first one? This film actually got under my skin more than I thought it would, and not in the way I expected to. I'm not like a diehard fan of the first Strangers, but I know there are a lot of fans out there that are. And they're going to be disappointed when they see just some throwaway straight-to-DVD slasher movie that's masquerading as a sequel to a cult slasher film that a lot of people like. This movie could have just been a fun slasher movie, and that's exactly what it should have been. It has some okay, effective moments, but it doesn't know which characters to focus on. It has an overabundance of stupid, idiotic character choices, and it doesn't really know how to be all that scary. The tension isn't as real as it could have been. The setup is okay, but once the first scene happens where you're like, okay, now we're in the thick of it, the movie just becomes a run away from somebody with a knife movie for the next hour. I'm going to give The Strangers Pray at Night a D. It also has a very silly ending. It's one of the first times in a while that I've out loud said, "What?" when the screen goes black. It was so stupid. This movie was disappointing. Guys, what did you think of this film if you saw it? Thank you so much as always for watching, and if you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.